Canada just pulled off a diplomatic masterstroke that could completely flip the power dynamics in North America's trade war. While Trump continues his aggressive tariff campaign against Canada over fentanyl, Canadian officials just held a game-changing meeting with the new U.S. Attorney General that signals a major shift in strategy. We're talking about a coordinated diplomatic offensive that could neutralize Trump's entire justification for his punishing tariffs.
A very good call with Prime Minister Carney of Canada yesterday morning.
Yes.
Actually, Canada is taking away some retaliatory tariffs.
He's removing his tariffs, yeah.
Exactly.
He's removing his retaliatory tariffs, which I thought was nice. And we're going to have another call soon. Okay. Yeah, we had a very good...
So what exactly happened in Washington, and why could this meeting change everything? To understand the significance of what just unfolded, we need to rewind to how we got here. Since returning to office, Trump has weaponized the fentanyl crisis as his primary justification for imposing devastating tariffs on Canada. In February, he declared a national emergency under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, specifically citing the flow of fentanyl and illegal drugs across the northern border as an extraordinary threat to American national security. The tariffs started at 25%, but Trump wasn't satisfied. In July, he escalated to 35%, threatening even higher rates if Canada didn't bend to his demands. Trump's narrative has been simple and devastating. Canada has failed to cooperate in curbing the ongoing flood of fentanyl and other illicit drugs into the United States. In his typical bombastic style, he's painted Canada as complicit in what he calls a national emergency that's killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. The White House fact sheets have been unrelenting, claiming that Mexican cartels are operating fentanyl synthesis labs in Canada, and that Canada-based drug trafficking organizations maintain robust super labs that can produce 44 to 66 pounds of fentanyl weekly. But here's where Trump's narrative starts to crumble. The actual data tells a completely different story. According to U.S. Customs and Border Protection data, only about 43 pounds of fentanyl was seized at America's northern border in 2024, compared with roughly 21,100 pounds seized at the southern border. That means less than 1% of fentanyl intercepted at U.S. borders comes from Canada. Even Trump's own Drug Enforcement Administration data supports this reality. Canadian Prime Minister Carney has repeatedly pointed out that fentanyl seizures at the U.S.-Canada border have dropped to near zero levels, while Canada has invested $1.3 billion in new border security measures. Meanwhile, fatal overdoses from fentanyl have been plummeting in the United States since 2023, down more than 30% according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The crisis Trump claims justifies his emergency tariffs has actually been improving at an unprecedented pace, falling below 90,000 deaths in a 12-month period for the first time in roughly half a decade. So if the fentanyl crisis is improving and Canada plays almost no role in the problem, why has Trump continued to escalate? The answer lies in Trump's broader trade strategy. Multiple experts have pointed out that Trump is using the fentanyl issue as a pretext for protectionist trade policies. Chinese officials have accused the Trump administration of politicizing and weaponizing trade issues, using fentanyl as cover for tariff hikes that serve other economic purposes. Canada's response has been measured but firm, with Prime Minister Carney calling Trump's criticism unjustified and implementing retaliatory tariffs on $155 billion worth of U.S. goods. But yesterday's meeting in Washington represents a completely different approach. Justice Minister Sean Fraser, Public Safety Minister Gary Anandasangari, and Canada's fentanyl czar Kevin Brosseau held what the Justice Department called a productive first meeting with U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi. This wasn't just another diplomatic courtesy call. This was a strategic move to go directly to the source of Trump's fentanyl narrative and demonstrate Canada's serious commitment to addressing the issue. The meeting lasted about 45 minutes, and according to Fraser's office, the tone was warm and cordial. But more importantly, the Canadian officials exchanged personal numbers with Bondi and agreed to stay in close contact. They discussed shared priorities and explored ways to strengthen collaboration between their departments. Canada used this opportunity to highlight its ongoing efforts to keep communities safe from fentanyl and transnational criminal organizations on both sides of the border. The focus wasn't just on current cooperation, but on future initiatives. The Canadian officials outlined border security measures and criminal justice reforms. The government is planning to introduce this fall, including bail reform, sentencing changes, and legislation to address gender-based violence. They were essentially saying, look, we're not just responding to your demands, we're proactively strengthening our entire criminal justice system. What makes this meeting particularly significant is that it was initiated by the U.S. side. The Department of Justice reached out to Canadian officials to schedule these talks, describing it as a touch-base meeting with the goal of maintaining an open dialogue. This suggests that even within the Trump administration, there's recognition that Canada has been a cooperative partner on law enforcement issues. The timing couldn't be more strategic. Prime Minister Carney pledged to remove retaliatory tariffs on CUSMA-compliant U.S. goods by September 1st.
Details about how this meeting came about. What can you tell us?
JP, the Canadian source tells me that after the Prime Minister's announcement that he would drop some of those countermeasures, that Mark Carney and Donald Trump exchanged texts and that they agreed LeBlanc would come here to Washington for these talks. The source also said there was a recognition from the American side that Canada had taken a significant step by removing some of these countermeasures and that talks should pick up. We also know that Canada's ambassador to the U.S., Kirsten Hillman, was also at today's meeting with Lutnick. The Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and Canada's Clerk of the Privy Council are also here. These are all top officials really signaling how serious these conversations could be. But what's not clear, JP, is where these negotiations are at behind closed doors and how close or not Canada actually is to reaching a deal.
Following that announcement, Carney and Trump exchanged texts with Trump, agreeing that dropping retaliatory tariffs would intensify trade discussions between the two countries. The American side recognized that Canada had taken a significant step by removing these countermeasures. Top Canadian officials, including the ambassador, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, and the Clerk of the Privy Council, are all participating in these negotiations, signaling just how seriously Canada is taking this moment. So Canada is essentially offering an olive branch while simultaneously demonstrating its commitment to addressing the very issue Trump claims justifies his tariffs. But Canada's strategy goes deeper than just this one meeting. The appointment of Kevin Brosseau as Canada's fentanyl czar in February was itself a strategic response to Trump's tariff threats. Brosseau, with his extensive career in law enforcement and role as former Deputy National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, was specifically mandated to work closely with U.S. counterparts and law enforcement agencies to accelerate Canada's work in tackling the fentanyl trade. Since February, Brosseau has been leading what Canada calls a Team Canada approach, convening all involved departments and agencies across the federal government every week to implement border security plans and drive the fight against fentanyl. He's met with all levels of government in Canada, U.S., and international partners and stakeholders across the country to strengthen efforts to stop the production and trafficking of illegal fentanyl. The interim report from Canada's fentanyl czar, released in June, provides a comprehensive picture of Canada's efforts. It acknowledges the overwhelming scale and scope of the crisis, noting that thousands of Canadians have died due to fentanyl and other synthetic opioid overdoses. But it also emphasizes that strong domestic and cross-border collaboration is happening and being improved, with multiple forums for such collaboration being established. Crucially, the report puts the Canada-US fentanyl issue in proper context. While Canada is working diligently to reduce the flow of illicit fentanyl to zero, the volumes moving from Canada into the U.S. are negligible. Based on U.S. Customs and Border Patrol data since 2022, about 1/10 of 1% of fentanyl seizures are attributed to the northern U.S. border. The report notes that these volumes are far less than the flow of illegal narcotics into Canada from the U.S. What's particularly interesting is that Canadian and U.S. officials see opportunities to deepen collaboration on disrupting the illegal fentanyl trade. The many actions Canada has taken have been welcomed by the U.S. and generally seen as building on the strong operational coordination that's already in place. This suggests that at the working level, U.S. law enforcement recognizes Canada as a valuable partner, not an obstacle. The meeting with Attorney General Bondi also served another strategic purpose. The Canadian officials offered their condolences over a shooting at a Minnesota church that left 3 dead and 17 people injured. This wasn't just diplomatic courtesy, it was a reminder that both countries face domestic security challenges that require cooperation, not confrontation. Meanwhile, Canada's broader diplomatic offensive continues. The same day as the Bondi meeting, Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc's office said he was leaving Washington with a sense that progress was made after a meeting with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. The two men had met on Tuesday as well, with what LeBlanc's office described as a constructive and lengthy meeting that was supposed to last an hour but went for 90 minutes. Canadian sources told CBC News there was a sense of optimism following that meeting. This represents Canada's second high-level meeting with U.S. officials since Prime Minister Carney's tariff removal pledge. The strategy appears to be working on multiple levels. Demonstrating cooperation on the specific issue, Trump claims justifies his tariffs, while simultaneously engaging in broader trade discussions that could lead to a comprehensive resolution. But perhaps the most significant aspect of this entire diplomatic push is what it reveals about the weakness of Trump's position. If Canada was truly the fentanyl threat that Trump claims, would U.S. law enforcement officials be reaching out for friendly cooperation meetings? Would they be exchanging personal phone numbers and agreeing to stay in close contact? Would meetings be described as warm and cordial? The reality is that Trump's fentanyl justification for tariffs has always been more about politics than policy. By engaging directly with U.S. law enforcement and demonstrating concrete cooperation on the issue, Canada is essentially calling Trump's bluff. They're saying, if this is really about fentanyl, then let's work together on fentanyl. If you're satisfied with our cooperation on the issue you claim is the problem, then what's the real justification for these punishing tariffs? This puts Trump in an increasingly difficult position. He can't simultaneously claim that Canada is uncooperative on fentanyl while his own Attorney General is having productive, friendly meetings with Canadian officials about deepening that cooperation. He can't argue that Canada isn't doing enough to address the issue while Canadian officials are outlining comprehensive criminal justice reforms and border security measures. The broader context makes Trump's position even more precarious. The fentanyl crisis that he's using to justify emergency tariffs has been improving dramatically. Fatal overdoses are down more than 30%. Seizures at the Canadian border have dropped to near zero. Meanwhile, Canada has invested billions in border security and appointed a dedicated fentanyl czar who's working closely with U.S. counterparts. At the same time, Trump's tariffs are causing real economic damage. The 35% tariff on Canadian goods is affecting everything from lumber to energy to agricultural products. American businesses and consumers are feeling the impact through higher prices and supply chain disruptions. The economic justification for these tariffs becomes harder to maintain when the security justification is clearly falling apart. Canada's strategy of removing retaliatory tariffs while demonstrating enhanced cooperation creates additional pressure on Trump. By taking the high road and offering concrete solutions to the problems Trump claims to be addressing, Canada is making it increasingly difficult for Trump to maintain his aggressive stance without looking unreasonable. The international community is watching this closely as well. Trump's use of national emergency powers to impose tariffs based on questionable security justifications sets a dangerous precedent for global trade. If Trump can declare a national emergency over a fentanyl problem that primarily originates from Mexico and impose tariffs on Canada, what's to stop other countries from using similar pretexts for protectionist measures? Looking ahead, yesterday's meeting could represent a turning point in the Canada-U.S. trade relationship. If Attorney General Bondi reports back to Trump that Canada is indeed a cooperative and valuable partner in fighting fentanyl, it becomes much harder for Trump to maintain his narrative of Canadian obstruction. The warm tone of the meeting and the agreement to maintain close contact suggests that at the law enforcement level, there's no adversarial relationship. Canada's comprehensive approach addressing both the immediate fentanyl cooperation issue and broader criminal justice reforms shows a government that's serious about addressing legitimate concerns while not giving in to unreasonable demands. The fact that these reforms were planned for the fall, before any tariff threats, demonstrates that Canada's commitment to border security and criminal justice isn't just a response to Trump's pressure. The exchange of personal contact information between the Canadian officials and Attorney General Bondi is particularly significant. This suggests a relationship that goes beyond formal diplomatic channels to personal professional cooperation. It's hard to maintain that a country is a security threat when your law enforcement officials are on a first-name basis with their counterparts. For Trump, the challenge now is finding a way to de-escalate without appearing to back down. The fentanyl justification for tariffs is clearly undermined by yesterday's meeting and the broader evidence of Canadian cooperation. But Trump has invested significant political capital in portraying Canada as uncooperative and threatening. Walking back from that position requires either finding a face-saving compromise or admitting that the tariffs were never really about fentanyl in the first place. Canada's strategy of proactive engagement, concrete cooperation, and strategic tariff removal creates multiple pathways for Trump to declare victory while backing down. He could claim that his tough stance forced Canada to increase cooperation, even though the evidence shows Canada was already cooperating. He could point to the new criminal justice reforms as a response to his pressure, even though they were planned independently. The broader implications of this diplomatic offensive extend beyond the immediate trade dispute. Canada is demonstrating how middle powers can effectively respond to aggressive unilateral actions by larger neighbors. Rather than simply retaliating or escalating, Canada has combined measured retaliation with proactive engagement, creating pressure for de-escalatio, and while maintaining its principled positions. Yesterday's meeting with Attorney General Bondi represents the culmination of months of strategic patience and professional diplomacy. By going directly to the heart of Trump's fentanyl narrative and demonstrating genuine cooperation, Canada has effectively called Trump's bluff. The question now is whether Trump will recognize the off-ramp that Canada has provided, or whether he'll double down on a position that's becoming increasingly untenable. Either way, Canada has shown that sometimes the most effective response to aggressive rhetoric is quiet competence and genuine cooperation.
And there is a time in a game, in a big game, and this is a big game, when you go hard in the corners, your elbows up. The time in a game where you drop the gloves in the first period and you send a message. And we've done that pretty uniquely in the world. We happen to have the best deal with the Americans right now. I'd know. But there's also a time in a game where you want the puck, you want a stick handle, you want to pass, you want to put the puck in the net. And we're moving later into the game, and we're at that time of the game.
Like in a hockey game, there are different moments in negotiations. Times to be aggressive with elbows up and dropping the gloves to send a message, which Canada has done uniquely in the world. But as negotiations progress into later phases, the strategy needs to shift from confrontational tactics to more skillful maneuvering. Time to stick handle, pass, and put the puck in the net. Canada appears to have made that strategic shift at exactly the right moment.